Can you lose weight on a high-carb diet? Hi, I'm Dr. Eric Westman, and welcome back to my channel where I review and debunk nutritional information online. In this video, we're going to hear about a study where people can lose weight on a high-carb diet. And if that's surprising to you, it shouldn't be, but if it is, please listen, because I'm going to go through the calories in, calories out versus carbohydrate-insulin theories of obesity. They both matter, and one might actually be working at by the mechanism of the other, and we just don't call it out that way. But so if you're confused about losing weight, carbs, be sure to wait till the end so you can hear my final thoughts. I want to invite you to join my free webinar, Beyond Cholesterol, the two biggest risk factors for cardiovascular disease. If you're confused about cholesterol or feeling pressured to take medication to lower your cholesterol, this webinar is for you. I'll provide the facts you need to understand why cholesterol isn't the most important factor in assessing your risk for cardiovascular disease, and what you should focus on instead to better reduce your risk. See the link in the description to sign up.
Can you lose body fat on a high-carb diet? Well, a recently published case study highlights that in a calorie deficit, an individual eating a diet enriched in high glycemic index carbohydrates was able to lose significant amounts of body weight and body fat over the duration of the study. The title of this poster session is The Effects of a High Carbohydrate, High Glycemic Load, Hypocaloric Diet on Body Fat Loss, a case study. Now, I think this is really interesting, and it addresses a question that many of us have had over the past, 8, 9 years, and that is, how do fitness models and fitness competitors who seemingly eat a high glycemic index low diet and have things like cheat days and brownies and cookies and donuts and white rice and things like that, how can they do that in a contest prep phase while also losing body fat? And as this case study talks about, this study indicates that a carbohydrate-rich, high glycemic load hypocaloric diet is a viable strategy for losing body fat and challenges the notion that body fat cannot be reduced while consuming a high carbohydrate, high glycemic load diet.
Well, let me pause right there. Always consider the source, and High Intensity Health is a good scientific source. He reviews data and science. What's interesting here is the context. Of course you can lose weight if it's hypocaloric. That in the title, it says on a hypocaloric diet, of course. Well, I was introduced to weight loss at Duke University, where I still am, and practice 4 days a week. And the first approach that I was introduced to was called the rice diet, the Duke rice diet. It was owned by Duke for a while and then let go, owned privately, and started by a physician named Walter Kempner, whose patient misunderstood what he said and came back just eating rice and fixed her malignant hypertension. That's how the story got started and how the diet got started. But it was rice, fruit, and fish. And it was at varying caloric level, but it was always hypocaloric, meaning some people started out at 800 calories per day. If most people need 2,000 or 2,500 calories per day. That's really low in calories. Sometimes the rice diet was up to 1,200 and it changed through the years, so you'll hear different versions of it. But the point is that it was very high in carbohydrate and people lost weight. This is not news. And so what's fascinating is that someone had a case study of something we've known for forever. So if you are hypocaloric, meaning you're eating less energy than you're expending, you're going to access your body store and lose fat weight. We store energy in our bodies in the form of fat. We store energy in our bodies in the form of fat. So if you're not going to eat much, you're going to store your body fat and you draw upon your body fat store if you don't eat much. All you have to do is watch some reality shows where people go out into the middle of nowhere. Of course, they're not eating carbohydrates, they're not eating anything. And so if you keep the calories low, with the idea that you can't lose weight on a high carb diet if the calories are low, I don't know how we got into this situation where this is novel or something new, unless, let's keep going.
the resistance training stimulus, and possibly the anti-catabolic effects of insulin that are likely increased as such a diet help to mitigate lean tissue loss and resting metabolic rate. Further discourse and application on dieting for weight loss should focus on well-structured nutritional plans that employs a sustainable caloric deficit rather than focusing on one specific macronutrient or food group.
So for ages, the powers that be in charge of obesity research kind of signed off their brains to the fact that, you eat less, you lose weight because it's calories in, calories out. Well, the problem with that idea is that it doesn't work well in the real world. People are left with hunger, they want to eat more, and even though it is true, you can't lose weight unless the calories coming in are less than you're expending. I've heard this said in different ways, one by Gary Taubes, who kind of makes fun of it, saying, of course calories in, calories out is what's going on, but it's just not helpful. Kind of like if you look at someone, kind of like if we're looking at a crowded restaurant and you ask me, why is it crowded? I say, well, more people went in than came out. And you say, no, that's not what I meant. Why is the restaurant crowded? And I say, more people went in than came out, even louder. So, because if you don't understand it, you just yell louder, people will understand, right? No, of course not. So the person says, no, why is the restaurant crowded? Is it good food? Is it the idea that there's a view? Is it great drinks, great service? So you cannot have a crowded restaurant unless more people went in than came out. You cannot have weight loss unless fewer calories go in than come out. And Gary Taubes, in his story about this, it's kind of ridiculous. Why would we perseverate on the idea that calories in, calories out causes obesity? It's not helpful. It's not helpful for me to say that more people went in the restaurant than came out. That's why it's crowded. It's true, but it's not helpful. Now, years pass, and David Ludwig at Harvard brings together the calories in, calories out people and the carbohydrate-insulin hypothesis people. These are hypotheses, they're not people. But you'll hear it said that way, like, we are some sort of believers. Well, we're scientists, and we explain things. Yeah, sure, you can explain things, but it's just calories in, calories out. But that's not helpful in the practical sense of trying to help people lose weight. Do you remember doing that? Calculating calories and you're at your limit and you're like, oh my gosh, I can't have any more, so I'll just kind of go off the plan. Let me know your results or your experience down below. And then almost miraculously in the practical world of weight loss, people start just talking about the calories, keep the calories low. Oh no, excuse me. They keep talking about the carbs, keep the carbs low. It's like a new concept. Of course, it's very old, but it's new to some people now even. And the idea, I don't even worry about calories because your hunger goes down and you eat less. I would say 95% of the time. Of course, my clinic, and often some of the comments below are the people for whom it doesn't work. And that's why we have this clinic, and that's why we treat people one-on-one, because there are other issues going on typically. But so you count carbs, calories go down. You can't lose weight unless the calories go down and your expenditure went way up, but that's really hard to do. So for weight loss, some people argue, and I think there's a lot of truth to this, that we're really saying the same thing, and that insulin is going down and you're accessing the fat store that way, that in fact that's how it works. So the way a low carb works is that you eat fewer calories. It's explaining why fewer people are going in the restaurant now. Why? Because you're burning the body fat that's already on your body. So if you're still confused about calories in, calories out, and carbohydrate-insulin, it's because they both work. And people have said it's one way or the other way. And the context is that 25 years ago, when I got into this world of obesity medicine, nobody thought about anything differently than calories in, calories out in the academic world. And even then, there's some people kind of holding on to this like it's some sacred thing. Well, because it's true. David Ludwig, in this article, brought up a term called a tautology. Now, I trained in liberal arts back then when they were still calling it liberal arts, and I took English and history and all that, but I still had to look up the meaning of tautology when David put it in this paper, bringing together the compromise that both really have some idea of truth, and that this could be a framework for actually talking about and studying whether one or the other is at play. Tautology is basically true. It's true. So if you say, the earth is round, it's a tautology, it's true. If you say calories in, calories out, and more calories went in, and that's why people got obese, it's true. So he calls it a tautology, instead of kind of making it seem ridiculous, like Gary Taub's metaphor of the crowded restaurant. Just saying that it's a tautology is the way he said it. So yes, you're going to lose weight because of calories in, calories out, but the mechanism of how you do it could be just by telling you to not eat carbohydrates. Your fat starts to burn. Is it because the insulin has gone down? Maybe that's it. It never really mattered to me the exact mechanism of how this worked. I got into this and it worked, and so many things change. It's kind of befuddled the NIH mechanistic, or if anyone really just wants to know the mechanism, because there are probably many mechanisms at play. But so, yes, you have to have fewer calories going in to lose weight. The restaurant is crowded because more people went in than came out. I mean, that has to be true, but was it good service? Is it great food? So it's just not helpful to only think of the calories in, calories out, and be stubbornly holding on to it and not thinking that maybe something else might be true as well.
Now, I know many of you are going to be a little bit disenchanted with this finding because, as you can see from figure 1, the body fat loss over the course of 30 weeks is quite substantial.
Again, I'm just trying to, so I'm not befuddled by this. Oh, right. So if you only learned about keto and losing weight and low carb recently, you're going to get into this internet keto confusion where people say calories don't count, calories don't matter, just talk about carbs. And of course, always consider the context. We're talking about here about really fit people trying to manipulate their body fat. That's a different context than if you're trying to reverse obesity or type 2 diabetes. But in the title, because it's hypocaloric, that means hypo means low, caloric means calories. So if it's hypocaloric, that means they made the study to be fewer calories in coming out than are being expended as best they could measure. So this doesn't befuddle me. So I'm befuddled high intensity health of why you would think this is even important and novel. And I think here we have it, that a lot of people have come in thinking that calories don't matter, calories don't count. I could eat all the fat I want because there are no carbs in it. Internet keto tells me this. Well, how's that working for you? So actually, low carb diets work for weight loss because you eat less and there are fewer calories going in than coming out. It's a tautology. It's true.
When you look at the amount of kilograms of pure fat, it's almost 22 pounds of fat, which is really pretty remarkable in about 6 months or more period of time, especially because this diet included a high glycemic load diet. 60% of the calories were coming from carbohydrates, 20% protein, the rest was from fats. Refeeds and diet breaks were accounted for in targeting the calorie deficit. Now here's, I think, the kicker.
So again, I think some people have come in the train, gotten on the story a little late in the game. Most ultra low fat diets, the rice diet is ultra low fat, the Ornish, the Pritikin, these are probably 60% carbs or around there, low in protein and ultra low in fat, and they lose weight. People lose weight on it because it's lower in calories than what they're expending. This is not novel, it's not new. I don't think, so this is a meeting presentation. I don't think this would be published in a journal. If someone said it was novel, maybe they could shape it as there are a lot of people who believe that you can't eat high carb diets and lose weight. Well, actually, that's what we've been fighting against for the last 50 years, where people thought you couldn't lose weight on a low carb diet. It had to be low fat and low calorie, when really a low carb diet becomes a low calorie diet. I mean, I'm going to say this in different ways so that by the end of the video, you understand that this case study should never have had to be done.
And that is that this individual did resistance and aerobic training 3 times per week each, respectively. And I think this is the important point. If you are exercising, you have a lot more buffer room or flexibility in terms of the quantities and types of calories or macronutrients that you eat.
Well, now that's an interesting thing. So it can't just be calories. So it must be the exercise no, it is just the calories. My evidence is that the rice diet, the people would come to Durham, little old Durham, North Carolina, to basically starve themselves on the rice diet. They didn't exercise. In fact, the rice diet back in the day was just this building, and they did the clinical exams next door. Later, they put up a clinic near it, and then if someone wanted to exercise, they basically said, "Here's a trail in Durham. Go for a walk." I mean, it wasn't part of the program. An obesity medicine program that really treats people that are sick, people can't exercise. So no, it's entirely the calorie deficit, the hypocaloric nature. And yet, sure, you might be able to get away with eating more if you're exercising a little more. But it's interesting to see how he kind of says, well, it couldn't just be that. So it must be the exercise that did it. Well, I don't think so.
If you're burning a lot of that energy by way of heavy resistance training paired with aerobic training, it's probably less important about the macronutrient composition or the types of carbs you eat or how much carbs you eat compared to if you're just sedentary. Now, we know many people have changed their body composition in extraordinary ways on a low-carb, low-glycemic index diet, but many of these people are also sedentary. I've seen the comments, I've met many of you who have done this, and you admit that you should focus a little bit more on exercise and prioritize muscle and the like, but it turns out that because individuals who are very physically fit and burning through a lot of these energy, whether it's excess energy, and they're in a calorie deficit, so they're able to dip into these energy stores and manipulate the different hormones, glucagon, cortisol, insulin, and so forth, as a consequence of being in a calorie deficit, these folks are able to shed the body fat, and they have more buffer room because they are exercising.
Yeah, no, but I can see that he's struggling to try to explain it couldn't be just the calories, because if you come in on this train right now, people say calories don't matter, but what they really do. Again, use other sorts of information. I like, the weatherman might say it's going to rain here, what percent chance is there? But I look out the window and I gauge it myself. Of course, that doesn't tell me what's going to happen in an hour. So you want to also look to see what the weatherman says. It depends where you live on how accurate the weather man or weather woman is. But so exercise is not necessary. And a lot of people even think that they can't lose weight because they can't exercise, because if I can't lose weight if I don't exercise, I might as well not even try. But no, because look on this reality TV, you can see in front of your eyes people who eat nothing for a period of time. That means they have to be drawing upon their body fat store. They're still alive, and they're in one of these shows, they go 21 days basically without eating anything. And you see the before and after picture. They lost 1 pound or 2 per day of weight, which probably isn't the healthiest way to do it because of some of the muscle mass loss, we think, although that's kind of been shaken up by the intermittent fasting autophagy folks. And I still wrestle, how did that person live for a year without eating anything? That's sort of the longest total fast we have on record. If someone really needs the protein, and there has to be some way to recycle it, especially in that sort of extended fasting. You just can't envision a system that's not working without that sort of protein, because we're made of protein, mainly protein and water. But back here, so the explanation of losing fat weight, losing the fat store, is because you're not bringing in enough energy for your body, so your body draws upon its fat store. The reason we talk about energy is there's a whole lot of baggage about calories, and people have triggered. I did low calorie, and because there was hunger, and you had a ceiling on the amount you could eat, the calories, unless it had 0 calories, that it doesn't work well for most people.
And I know I'm biased, and you can see my bias here, but it's because scientifically this makes sense, and we now have research. So if you are eating a higher carbohydrate diet and you're worried about your body composition, please just prioritize exercise. Now, this doesn't mean that a high carbohydrate and high glycemic index diet is best for long-term metabolic health. We know that having lower glycemic index carbs from whole real foods paired with exercise and possibly a little bit of calorie restriction and diet breaks and so forth is optimal for both metabolic health and body composition. But we do have case reports and observational anecdotal reports from people who are eating relatively high glycemic index and high carbohydrate diets, and they still lose body fat. So I think there's a little bit more nuance to the conversation about the carbohydrate-insulin model of obesity, as well as the energy deficit model and the energy balance model when it comes to body weight regulation. I think both arguments make a lot of sense, and we have case studies and reports from David Ludwig and Carla Ebling, I think is her name, that does a lot of research with Ludwig, on the idea that a low-carb diet and being in a state of ketosis might make you more energetically efficient and, might have a calorie and muscle sparing effect and beyond. But that being said, I think we do have pretty good data now to suggest that if you're exercising, you have more wiggle room in your diet.
Well, and I like he's reading all the right things, and what's interesting here is the context of that he's kind of surprised about this. No, you don't need to exercise to lose weight on an ultra low fat diet. I mean, that's the rice diet that Duke had and was in Durham. Doesn't exist anymore. These days, it seems to me that that's just a little too restrictive, and most people would rather go for a lot of animal-based meat or steaks and burgers, and that's the low carb, high fat rather than the ultra low fat. And for years, I would hear people say, "Oh, I'm so sorry that you have to lower your fats. I wish I could tell you could have hamburgers and steaks and lose weight. This is what I was raised with, right? You too, right? Well, you can if you choose to do it in a low carb, high fat way." What's fascinating about this is just people coming in to the science right now. The bias that he's talking about is that he only thought that carbohydrate-insulin model and lowering carbs was the only way to lower the calories and to have a calorie deficit, and thought that maybe the carbohydrate-insulin model worked in some other universe where you didn't have to worry about calories. Well, remember, calories in, calories out is a tautology. It's true. And the low carb has to work within that framework. The rebellion of the low carb people, the doctors, and mostly in the diet books over the last 50 years, the rebellion is that if you just talk about calories, it doesn't work in the practical world. And following a low carb diet becomes so easy because the hunger goes away for so many people. But the scoffing, and I saw this 20 years ago, even today, where the scoffing of the academics is, but that can't be true. It's only calories in, calories out. And they're really talking the same language. And actually the clinical people were talking a language of trying to help people rather than sticking to a dogmatic theory that, yes, it's true, but it doesn't really help to just focus on that. After I heard Gary Taubes' restaurant metaphor of the crowded restaurant, how did it get crowded? More people went in than out. It was very difficult for me to go back to the Obesity Society meetings where this is all they would talk about. We know it causes obesity, more calories in than calories out. What are you low carb people talking? Wait, people who talk about low carb hypotheses, what do you mean? It was these folks who kind of shut off the discussion, and it actually shut off the investigation from the NIH and other governmental agencies, because this is a peer group based sort of funding mechanism system. If you didn't mention or follow what was believed to be true, you couldn't get money to fund it. That's why a lot of the low carb research that was done and is being done is funded by non-governmental, non-NIH sources, because there's sort of a cartel, if you will, of a way of thinking in order to get funding. Hopefully, and yes, it is changing very slowly, but hopefully that'll change in a much faster way if you focus on how people are doing. So again, this video is interesting, not from the case study. This has been innumerable people have lost weight on high carb, low calorie diets. That's not what's interesting to me. What's interesting is that some people thought this was new.
My own anecdotal report that my vantage point that I found over the years of manipulating my macronutrients, trying low carb diets, high carb diets, and pairing that with training and looking at body composition shifts. So I would love to know what you think in the comment section below. If you are exercising, you definitely have to check out the creatine enhanced electrolyte sticks by Myoscience, a really safe and effective ergogenic aid that can help you not only support healthy hydration, but also your athletic endeavors. You can save with the code podcast, and I will link that in the description below. But I think this is just an interesting case study that was published by PhD students at University of South Florida. Again, the reference, if you're driving and listening to this, is the effects of a high carbohydrate, high glycemic load, hypocaloric diet on body fat loss, a case study. Now, this is just a case study, but I think we have a lot of anecdotal reports in the fitness realm where people are consuming high carbohydrate diets and they're in a deficit and they're training and exercising and they still lose appreciable amounts of body fat, which flies in the face of the carbohydrate-insulin model.
Oh gosh, I feel like I'm in a time warp. And going back 30 years when we were presenting case studies of how low carb diets can work without even talking about calories. And yes, it started with anecdotes and case series, and now randomized trials have been done all over the world showing it. But the time warp is that if you, and from the University of South Florida, Tampa makes me think, that's where Dom D'Agostino is and a lot of the other keto scientists. So that if they were teaching people that it was only carbohydrate and insulin and didn't teach them about calories, then I can see how this is novel, because they were in this kind of bubble of everyone talking about low carb diets, where this has been done over and over and over, where you just lower the calories. Not so important what calories there are. If you get the calories really, really low, you will access your body fat and lose fat weight. Again, actually, high intensity health, there are actually not only case studies and anecdotes, there's research going back 50, 60 years on ultra low fat diets that are hypocaloric that lead to weight loss. In fact, if you looked in our randomized trials going back to 2002, 2004, the control group we used was a low-fat diet. It was low-fat, low-calorie compared to a low-carb diet. So even in those randomized trials, the low-fat, low-calorie diets worked for weight loss, but the low-carb diet, where we didn't talk about calories, worked as well, and maybe even better, like 90% of the time it works better in terms of weight loss. So again, the idea here is that if you're talking to your family, your friends who are they're gym rats, or they grew up now in an era where they've been told calories don't matter and you have to exercise. No, that's not the case. Actually, you can lower the calories and lose weight without exercise, and you can lower the calories and have high carb diets. The practical reality is that many people are left with hunger and it doesn't work for them. And you get taught by one or the other where really calories do matter, and they overwhelm or use the same mechanism as the carbohydrate-insulin model, where they both work by lowering the blood glucose and the insulin, allowing your body to burn its own body fat.
But I think the variable here is the exercise element. Many of you know that when you're training, volume and intensity is pretty high, you have a lot more wiggle room in your diet. And so this is why I think carb cycling, I'm a big fan of having, say, rice or fruit around exercise. You have more fuller, more pumped up muscles. You have a little bit more fuel in the tank to have a better workout, which I think over time leads to more favorable long-term changes in body composition and metabolic health compared to just being a strict low carb enthusiast and hoping that you have enough glycogen and energy on board to get through those exercise sessions and those workouts. Now, of course, if you have Crohn's, colitis, autoimmunity, and having those carbohydrates influences or causes flares in those autoimmune conditions or gastrointestinal conditions, that's a whole different conversation. But I think it is important to understand that there's multiple ways to go about this. So if you are exercising intensely, you can have a little bit more carbohydrate in your diet, and possibly, not that I always suggest this, but higher glycemic index carbohydrates, so long as you're in a deficit and exercising, and still observe appreciable changes in your body composition. So
always consider the context. So if you're viewing me, you're a patient, or you're in the clinical medical world, this audience is entirely different. You look at him, and he's young, he's fit, he's in the gym, and the flexibility that he's talking about is real. You can be flexible with the carbs you eat, a greater flexibility in that context. But the study he was talking about was weight loss, which should not be surprising on a high carb diet. Well, even most doctors don't get nutritional training to have that foundational knowledge to know what is possible, what's not possible. So don't worry, you don't have to exercise. If you're talking to family members, or especially folks who've grown up with the idea that calories don't matter, this is a great video to kind of tease out the idea that, yeah, calories do matter. It's just focusing that on the model of obesity really hasn't been helpful, and has kind of skewed a view of, well, just push the low-fat diet even more and more. And then when it was finally examined in over 40,000 women, the low-fat diet didn't do anything. The study didn't show that people got better, but the study did is it basically trained a whole cadre of researchers and dietitians in the US to think that a low-fat diet was best, when now we know in the retrospective scope that it's really not necessarily the best. So consider the context, and yes, you can lose weight if you keep the calories low. It's just not a very helpful way to go about teaching people how to do it. Of course, if you like this video, please like, subscribe, ring the notification bell, look out for new content twice a week. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell, and check out adaptyourlifeacademy.com.